because you're made in the image of God, and you're exchanging it for something that doesn't hold you morally accountable.
And so it's faith that justifies, and the works, that'd be like a process of sanctification, God changing our hearts.
As an American, it comes down to everybody has the right to have their own thing.
Oh, totally.
Sure.
And so
Beautiful from that.
that's where that's always been my standpoint.
That's the reason we can have a conversation.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
You know,
I'm very grateful for that.
Yes, very much so.
And we need to honor and respect each other.
Exactly.
Totally agree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line.
Yes.
And that's the way. That's good.
Yes, that is good.
That is good.
We're totally with you on that.
Yeah.
And and our basis, our foundation is we believe you're created in the image of God, and that you have great value and worth because that you're not simply particles in motion, but you actually reflect His image, and we have to honor that and care about you as a person. The claims of Christianity are very unique. C.S. Lewis, have you ever heard of him as a writer?
Yeah.
You ever read any of his stuff? He's
Narnia.
Yeah,
it's good
okay.
stuff.
He said, one of his quotes I really like, he said, there's Christianity and there's everything else. And the reason he said that is that every other form of religion, not that I don't respect all people, but every other form of religion is man trying to earn his way to heaven by his good works or trying to achieve something on his own. And Christianity says we can't do it. That Jesus came down and He took our place. Ultimately, He'll end up on the cross bearing our sin for us. And it's only through His righteousness and what He accomplishes on the cross that our sin is taken care of. And in fact, law and commandments, when I was talking to the 3 young ladies the other day, and I was asking them, what's your view of Christianity? This one, the one that was an atheist, said keeping rules. There was a gal over here that said keeping commandments. And then there was a Christian gal who said it's about a relationship with Jesus. And it's like the uniqueness of Christianity is we're talking about a God who reached down in history and fulfilled prophecy, spoke in time and space, goes to the cross. We can't save ourselves. And so He becomes the sin offering in our place. And then when we place our faith and trust in Him and not our ability to perform, because we can't perform, then righteousness is granted to us. It's imputed is the legal term, like in a courtroom. Justification is like a legal term where His righteousness is imputed to our account. Have you heard that before? That explanation? Okay. So I'm not saying anything you don't know. I'd be curious what your reaction is.
Well, people can justify a lot of stuff. And if you look at the history of Christianity, people have used Christianity and Islam and as an excuse to do a lot of non-Christian activities.
Right, a lot of sinful things.
Yeah,
yes.
and so it really comes down to the individual taking responsibility for his or her own behavior, and I think that's a very American way to look at it.
Yes.
And and that's what I do.
Yes.
That's what I do because I'm gonna take, as an adult, I'm gonna take responsibility for my actions.
Yeah.
And if I was a religious person, I wouldn't do that. I'd be like, well, the reason I shot that guy is because God wanted me to shoot that guy. Or, the reason I stole that money from that bank was because God said for me to do that. So as an adult, you take responsibility for your actions. As a religious person, you've got no responsibility at all because God does it.
Can I sort of
you can do whatever you want.
Can I disagree with you a little bit?
Absolutely.
A little gentle pushback on that one.
Absolutely.
So I talked about Jesus, as fulfilling a unique role, and jump in, Luke. I know you have a lot of thoughts too, but as followers of His, we look to the Bible as His revelation of truth, right, wrong, morality, and I would be very much in conflict with the teachings of the Bible, the teachings of Jesus, if I just arbitrarily did what I wanted, I went out and randomly murdered people or stole stuff, and the church, if they got our act together, would be coming alongside me saying, man, you are messing up. Well, why? Well, the Bible says this, And so it's not random, do whatever you want and justify it. And, the history of the church is filled with, it's interesting. I love church history, one of my favorite topics. And yeah, we blow it all the time. But go ahead, Luke, jump in. You've got a lot of thoughts.
Well, so it's interesting. My first thought was there's a lot of knowledge claims we're making right now. And so ultimately what I'm looking at is simply a meaningful justification for all these things that you hold on to. That's not arbitrary in nature, right? So in terms of, I would say you're borrowing from a Christian worldview because you do have dignity, you have respect, you honor people, and you may be basing it for in Buddhism. But what I would submit to you and contend with you is that ultimately what you're doing is exchanging what you know to be true because you're made in the image of God, and you're exchanging it for something that doesn't hold you morally accountable. Because, right, I would say I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite, first and foremost. I don't believe you should lie, right? And I've told lies. Have you told a lie?
Perhaps.
Yeah, and it says, I believe you should not steal. And, I've stolen. And I would say that makes me a thief, right? Telling lies makes me a liar. And so ultimately, I'm not saying I'm perfect, I'm good, or anything like that. But ultimately, I'm a hypocrite. And then if there is good, and we're kind of talking about, if there's a right way to go, if there's something that is outside of ourselves, ultimately, I'm not a good person. Because at the end of the day, even though I've done good things, I've still told lies. I've still stolen things. Like Jesus said, if you look at a woman with lust, you commit adultery in your heart. That's heavy. If you look at a woman with lust, you commit adultery.
Yeah, but you know what? You're gonna look at a woman with lust because that's
Absolutely.
who you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I would say that's our nature.
And you want to overcome that, and you want to improve on that and get to a better point.
Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah.
Luke, I'm sorry to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
You were right,
Go ahead.
right in the middle of a roll. Yeah. What's really interesting, one of the first books I read in the Bible is called the Book of Romans. And it talks about exactly what you're saying. Well, that's who you are. You're going to do that. And what the Bible talks about is that there's a rebirth experience. And the flesh is prone to sin. When the law says thou shalt not, there's part of us that will do it. We can't, we're driven because we're fallen. The claim is we're fallen creatures before God. When we place our faith and trust in Jesus and become pardoned from our sin and are cleansed, we experience something called a rebirth. And now we're justified or declared not guilty, but then in the walk, we're learning now we can put off the old. In other words, the old urges and drives, for example, lusting after women, this sort of thing, they still are there and they exist. And so I recognize that and I go, okay, but I'm no longer enslaved to that because that part of me died on the cross with Jesus. And now I can live to righteousness because I can yield and walk in the Spirit. And so there's this, it's called sanctification. There's this movement upward that I can move. And the chain of sin is no longer holds me in bondage. As I learn to recognize the flesh, I have the power now because it was put to death on the cross to put that off and to put Christ on it and walk in a different way. And that's the uniqueness of Christianity. The claim is pretty radical, isn't it? It's pretty radical.
Well, I'm going to go on my own little roll right now.
That's
go.
totally good.
Okay. My name is Charles Webster Bear, and today is November 4th, 2019.
Yes.
And we're in Redmond, Oregon, USA.
Yes.
And my website is globalinternetgovernment.com.
Oh my gosh.
Now, what you're saying is that humans are flawed.
Yes.
And you're right. We are flawed.
Yes.
The reason we're flawed is because we're trying to build a civilized society. And our DNA is for running around in the wilderness and, attacking animals to eat. That's the violence.
Yeah.
And defending ourselves from animals that want to eat us. That's the violence. And also the lust. That's why we were able to survive. But now that we build a civilized society, those traits that used to help us in the wilderness are now hurting us. The violence and the lust that used to help us in the wilderness, they're now no longer helping us in a civilized side, they're hurting us in a civilized side.
Right.
So what we try to do is we try to repress those things. And to repress them, they're just going to be like a balloon. It's going to pop out somewhere else.
Yeah.
Squeezing a balloon. So the idea of Buddhism is not to repress them, but to understand them and to accept them and to try to become better.
Right.
And to try to change and improve and evolve as a person and as a society, and to solve the issue that way, directly, rather than just be in denial and say it doesn't exist and I'm gonna wave a magic wand and it's gonna go away.
Yeah.
So that's the way I see it.
Right.
And
Wow. Yeah.
you know, I'm not saying your way is incorrect, and I'm not saying my way is correct. They're both different, but they're also kind of similar. But you know, it's whatever works. And some things work for some people, and other things work for other people. But in America, we've really, I think, done a very good job of making sure that everybody is able to be included. And if laws are wrong, then we're able to change those laws peacefully and in a civilized way. Not fighting, but voting.
Right.
And not fighting, but talking.
Right.
So I think we've got a great thing going here in America, and I think the rest of the world is catching on to that. And I think that people can work together, and I think that people are good and smart and will work together, and I think that we will solve these issues. And I think we'll solve these issues, and I think that'll be a great thing when we do.
Okay.
So, I guess a quick question. It implies a moral trajectory, I guess. You're saying upward, evolutionary. You're moving towards something. What's the...
Robots.
Oh, there you go. Everyone is a robot.
Well, no, we started out as trees, then we went to fish, then we went to mammals, then we went to apes. Now we're humans, and we're moving into robots. And it's just a straight line of life from trees to artificial intelligence.
Right. And so if I were to come to you, and like you said, everyone's right, I understand that, but if I were to come to you and say, hey, I'm going to go run over there and punch the next person I see.
Right.
Like, I would hope you would try to stop me.
Well, I'd say, okay, first of all, that's wrong. Secondly, whoever you punch has the right to defend themselves.
Right.
And thirdly, you need to look inside yourself and understand why you want to punch. And the reason you want to punch is because we have, over millions of years, developed, as carnivores, the hunting instinct to go and get food to survive and to defend ourselves from animals that want to eat us. That's why you want to go punch. Right. And so to understand that, and to understand that now in a civilized society it's wrong, and to understand why it's wrong, these are things that we can understand, and when we understand them, we can move beyond them. As opposed to saying, oh, I'll never punch again, then you're just going to go punch tomorrow.
True. Ultimately, though, if our ancestors were fish, what's the moral implications of our fish, or like
Fish
our developed?
Fish are violent. They are carnivores, and they eat.
But we don't.
To survive, it's violence to survive.
Right.
They eat and defend themselves with violence, so they can survive. That's why it's there.
So I would claim that ultimately, if our origins are based in stardust, that ultimately, over time, at this temperature, resulted in this, over a long period of time, I'll grant you, ultimately, if it landed here, we're just stardust bumping into stardust. In a cosmic sense, this doesn't matter.
Okay, on a universal level, you're right. Earth is just a crumb, insignificant.
Right.
On a universal level, that's absolutely true.
And so ultimately, if I go and punch someone, who cares?
Right. Okay. So.
And that's where I'm pushing the worldview to the ultimate end.
You're right. You're right about that. On a universal view, it is insignificant. However, to you, it's very significant. And for you to become a better person, that is very significant. And for you to understand what's going on, that is very significant.
See, I would say that's implying I would say you're taking from my worldview in terms of implying that there's dignity, worth, value, and a righteous standard.
There is.
But in the cosmic sense, in an atheistic worldview, you dismiss that and say, well, it's actually ultimately at the end of all time, it doesn't matter.
That's correct.
And so I would say, if it doesn't matter, then I can do whatever I want. Right. Nihilism is the way to go.
Right. That's correct.
Yeah.
But as Spock said, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. And logic is not everything. It's a lot, and I lean on it heavily, but it's not everything. And if you do look at it on a universal thing, the whole galaxy is insignificant on a universal level. However, to us, it is very significant. And to us, to the individual, it is significant. And that's what matters.
And I think the point that Luke is making and I'm making is that the significance that you're experiencing becomes because you're made in the image of God. You're right on when you say it does matter and it is significant for us. When I was interviewing the young gal who was an atheist, and she said depression and then she went in and started talking about suicide, and I said, are there a lot of your friends that are suicidal? And statistically now, as a high school teacher, and I saw a lot of kids take their own lives over the years that I taught, and I see a really strong linkage between believing that we're stardust and just an evolutionary system. We can't create meaning and purpose out of that. And I think there is a lot of despair and anxiety and frustration and depression that grows out of that worldview. And what we're offering is not our claim, but I think the biblical support is really solid. Right now, I don't know. This is not your area, but it's an interesting thing. The Old and New Testament are considered historically accurate because we have so many copies of the originals that are so close that even atheistic historians recognize we have accurate copies of both the Old and the New Testament. And so we have those accurate copies, and then the message in there, I think, I would say squares with reality, and then you have the prophetic breakthrough, which I mentioned. And then in terms of an evolutionary viewpoint, nowadays we look at the simple cell, and we're going, a simple cell is infinitely complex. And it's got DNA in it to tell all these particles what they have to do. It's like this infinitely complex machinery that Darwin never saw. And so the whole notion that something can come from nothing and that we can evolve from simple to complex doesn't fit the nature of reality at all. And I think the whole world, as we look at it, points to God.